Hello, welcome to this video, and this video is going to be called CAMEL Reevaluated, the Snow Goose Revisited, and it's going to form a sort of story, I think, but let me just set up why I am doing this video. I've recently reunited with my old band Frost online for an interview that's come out this week. And I think it will have premiered by the time you watch this video. It was a rather silly interview. We had a few knockabouts and all that type of thing. And at one point I relayed to John Mitchell and Jem Godfrey that I had been very disparaging to CAMEL, the progressive rock band, on many videos. Now, often when I'm disparaging artists or bands, I'm really sort of poking fun at myself, really, of my own prejudices, my own viewpoint of being a sort of middle-aged man, and you know, this idea that people take sides. And of course these videos do very well because people like the confrontation, and they sort of admonished me a little bit for picking on CAMEL, who are a legendary progressive rock band. And so I thought what I should do is revisit CAMEL and go back to the album that I heard as a very young man that actually turned me against CAMEL and put me off. And this story will entwine a number of other stories to it. And the theme of this video is going to be storytelling, because of course this album is a musical interpretation of a book by Paul Gallico that I think came out in the early 1940s called The Snow Goose. But before we get to that, let's get back to this album. So I went and purchased a copy. If I'm going to really listen to a record, I need to have it on vinyl. I need to be able to sit down and hold the album, because this is the habit that I developed as a young man, as we all did. And I like to be able to hold the album, and I like to be able to look at the back and see the details, maybe even if it's got an inner sleeve, which this one hasn't, have a look inside it and really just get a feel for it, and be able to listen, sit down and listen. You have to put the record on, you have to wait, and then halfway through you have to turn it over. And this is a completely different experience, I think, to the way we take in music today. So I grabbed a copy, I sat down, and I've had a couple of listens to it. Now, around about 1983, 1984, I had discovered progressive rock. Nobody in my school even knew of the bands that I was listening to, except for my best friend, who independently had become a fan of CAMEL and went to see them live. And he would come back and tell me how brilliant CAMEL were. And I think as a young man, I felt that you have that sort of silly adolescent sort of football team approach to music, which I think some people don't grow out of, but I definitely had it. So straight away I decided I would not like this CAMEL band. And so he sat me down one day and played me this. And I sat and listened to it, and this is how I perceived it as around about 15, 16 years old. Right? We've got this album here, and this, it says, is the music inspired by the Snow Goose. Now, I didn't get that. What I thought was this was the actual soundtrack to some sort of film. And looking at that cover, what I could see was a goose which looked as though it was inside an egg to me, about to be born. I thought this was some awful 1970s natural history documentary, which would cover in a very boring way the hatching of some goose and it hopping around and having to grow up on the side of some cold beach, while some, you know, very English progressive rock noodled away in the background. Someone who was my age in 1984, we were quite used to this being pulled into school and then wheeling in a big television and you know, hooking it up to the kids' programs that were on, the school programs that you could watch, which is always a very exciting thing, only to be confronted by a load of people with beards and long hair from about 10 years before telling you about the world, but in a way that seemed to have come out of a progressive rock view, you know, this... and as they sat there with their white coats and their beards and their long hair, you would hear the tinkling of Pink Floyd in the background, unbeknownst to us that these were bands, right? And so the thing about this album was, the progressive rock bands I liked, which are Genesis, King Crimson, you know, Yes, there was a lot of bite, there was a lot of guts to them, there was a lot of showing off, there was a lot of flamboyance. What we had here was almost like a classical record. You know, there was some nice bits of some nice playing, but there was a lot of almost like orchestral. And when I say orchestral, CAMEL had utilised a lot of woodwind instruments, which gives you the feeling of a bird, right? And so all of this looked a little bit sad to me. The whole thing seemed a little bit passé, and overwhelmingly, the issue I had with this album at 16 years old was it was boring. Now, and that was it. CAMEL weren't like Yes, they weren't like Genesis, they weren't like any of the bands I liked, because they were a bit wimpy. They were a bit airy-fairy. They were a bit insipid, limp. You know, they were a bit sort of blokes with long hair and flowing outfits playing, you know, sort of tinkly music that seemed a little bit like Sky. There was a band around at that time who now I absolutely love, but back then I hated Sky, you know, this sort of noodly grown-up music, you know, because I'd really come out of the new wave of British heavy metal, and I was exploring the virtuosity, and there's a ton of virtuosity here, but it just didn't chime with me. So that was my initial prejudice, I suppose. And because of that, I never listened to any of the albums. Well, to be honest, they brought an album out in 1984, and I don't know what the title was. And my friend had that album, and he would play that to me incessantly, and I really didn't like that album. And CAMEL fans might be able to tell me what that album was and why I didn't like it. It was probably full of sort of 80s production, because a lot of the progressive rock bands, as they moved into the 80s, didn't quite know what to do. And all the DX7s and gated reverb and Simmons drums clipping and popping all over them sound just didn't go with the sort of aesthetic that you associate with progressive rock. So I come to do this channel. I don't know much about CAMEL. I know they're a really important progressive rock band, and so I decide, because I understand how YouTube works, that there has to be something I don't like. This is a key thing with YouTube. I think if you sit down to watch a video and someone's telling their opinions about something, they better have some strong opinions, or it's going to be really boring. You know, can you imagine the top 10 progressive rock albums where we go, well, number 10, you know, I've got, well, you know, I didn't know really what to put really, so I've got Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which, well, I quite like that one. And then at number 9, I've got Relayer by Yes, which I think is quite good. I quite like that one. And you see what I'm saying? So you need to have almost like the villains of the piece. And there's 2 progressive rock bands I have decided to rain my ire down on. First being Marillion, and the second being CAMEL. And my hatred of Marillion inspired me to actually trawl through their whole catalogue and rank it, and I realised that it was absolutely some incredible music there, and I changed my opinion. Now, I think this seems to be something that I find an interesting thing to do when it comes to music, but also it seems to be a positive thing to be able to change your mind, to be able to reevaluate something. But out there in the world at the moment, it seems like a weakness. You know, there's many people that are ready to go, you said on a video you hated CAMEL, and now you're saying you like them. What's the point? What's the point in those old videos? What's the point? You know, if your opinions are like that, and this is the same people are going, but it's all subjective really, isn't it? You know, it's just your opinion. And I go, well, this is what is interesting. And the way I approach this is that I'm actually very interested in the idea of an opinion the way it relates to art. So I go and pick up this album and I sit down and listen to it again. Of course, it's a brilliant album. It's a classic progressive rock album. And what this is on the more pastoral side of progressive rock. So progressive rock can run from Rush and King Crimson, very heavy stuff, all the way across to Griffin, which is almost like a sort of medieval rock band where the rock has been really taken out. And CAMEL was somewhere going towards that. It's very ethereal. At the age of 16, I hadn't any time for that. But now I love it. And I enjoyed that. When I came down to sit and listen to it again, however, I didn't want to. And the reason was because for me, it was still a little bit of a trawl to get through this album. It was a little bit long-winded. And I sat back and I thought, I wonder why this is. And I started to think about the story. That this is an album, it's an instrumental album. There's a bit of vocals here and there, but on the whole, it's an instrumental album. And it is telling a story that we don't know of. It's inspired by a story, but it's telling a story. And the track titles take you through that story. You know, we have The Great Marsh, then Riada Goes to Town, Sanctuary, Fritha. And you think, what's all this about? So I started to have a look into the book. So in the early 40s, as I said earlier, Paul Gallico wrote this book, The Snow Goose. It was a very, very successful book. It was seen as quite a heavyweight book, even though in another way, it was quite a sentimental story. Now, I think the reason why it was such a success is because this book explores very perennial themes. And I started to become very interested in these themes. And not wanting to read the book, I'm not a big reader. I used to be a big reader, but since I've had to wear these, I find if I start reading a book, I just fall asleep, and then I open my eyes again and I fall asleep. So it's very difficult for me to read a book. So I got a rough idea of how the story went, and then I discovered that I think in 1970, 1971, the BBC made a film of this book, The Snow Goose. And this film, the lead character of Riada was played by an actor, one of Britain's great actors, that has, you know, and he plays it absolutely beautifully, this actor does. And of course, as I get here, Richard Harris, that's the guy. I just had to, Richard Harris, the great Richard Harris plays the main character in it. And the young girl who's called Fritha is played by a very young Jenny Agutter, I think pre the Railway Children, one of my favourite films. And this is an absolutely brilliant film. And you can watch it because the whole thing is up on YouTube. And I suggest you watch it if you're a CAMEL fan or not. And if you are a CAMEL fan, I think it might give you a different view of this album. So, what is the story of the Snow Goose? Well, it starts off with a man, and that man lives in a lighthouse, all alone on a great marsh. And this man is an artist, he's a painter, but he's also a disabled man. He, in the film, he is portrayed as having a withered arm and a hunchback. And because of this, he has been, you know, shunned by society, forcing him to the outer reaches where he lives away from the main society in this lighthouse all alone. He has developed a love of nature and of animals. And one day he is out and he sees two hunters on what he thinks is his land shooting at some geese, and he hits one goose. He goes up and admonishes these people and throws them into the mud, and then he runs to see where the bird is to see if it's all right. The bird has been sort of rescued by a young girl called Fritha. And so they take the bird back to his lighthouse, and they patch the bird up and start to make him, or her, I don't know whether it's a boy or a girl, better. Now, Fritha, the young girl, her parents had died at sea. and so she was an orphan. And so what we have are these two people that for various reasons are cut off from the rest of society. A child that is cut off because they're orphaned, and then a man cut off because of the way he is perceived. The man is a creative person, so he is experienced of the world and pulling it out, whereas this young girl is learning about the world and she's taking in information. She's taking information from him. Various things happen, and I won't go through it all, but he starts to do paintings, and he eventually does a painting of this girl with the goose. Now, the next thing that happens is the goose grows up, and the girl, who was obviously traumatized because she lost her parents, becomes very upset that this goose has got to go. But Rayada, the man, he turns around and says, you know, you've got to let the goose go. It's a natural thing. It's nature. You have to get used to this. And so we start to see that within this there is a father-daughter relationship starting to emerge, as he is trying to put his wisdom about the world and sort of protect her from all the sort of things that are going to come at you in life. And of course the bird leaves. And with the bird leaving, so does Fritha. And Rayada finds himself all alone again. He carries on, he finishes the painting, and then this bird returns. And the bird returns despite its biological drive to do this migratory thing. So the bird also found solace within these two people. So as the bird returns, it brings them back together. And I think this is a very important thing, this idea of family and being brought together. We have this odd family here, you know, with the father and the daughter and then this goose. So they're living happily now together, and that Rayada knows that Fritha is going there because of the goose. Now, all this is set in the 1930s. As this is progressing, and and Fritha grows up, we enter the Second World War. They are based obviously on the coast, and there is this idea that they must be quite close to the English Channel. So when Dunkirk happens and the thing is put out to go and collect some of the soldiers off the beach, this is a very famous thing in English history, which is interesting because Paul Gallico is American, and yet he set this in the UK and pulled on a lot of British themes. So Rayada, he gets on his boat, he goes out to rescue these soldiers. He does rescue a lot of soldiers, but he doesn't return, he's killed. This upsets Fritha immensely, and she returns back to the lighthouse. Now in the book, a German bomber comes in and destroys the lighthouse at that point, which of course they would have, and everything is destroyed except for the painting. And it ends with Fritha with this painting. In the film, they obviously didn't have the budget to blow up the lighthouse, so she just returns back. And as she returns and she is looking at this painting, she sees the return of the Snow Goose, and then the Snow Goose leaves, right? Now, there's a lot of symbology in this, which I found very interesting. I've done a video at some point about, it was a philosophical video where I looked at intention. And I use as a metaphor for intention, which is this idea of looking out into the world and the way we perceive the world, as the lights that were used by the Lancaster bombers that Sir Barnes Wallis invented to blow up the dams in Germany. And the way they knew that they were the right heights, that they had two lights that would shine on the surface of the water, and when the two beams joined up, they knew that they were right height to drop the bombs. And then they had this little thing they looked through, and when the two things lined up with the two towers, they knew to do that, and it worked. Now, they practiced their bombing expedition, if that's the right word, at a place called Rayada. And Rayada was a place I used to visit all the time when I was a kid. And the incredible thing about Rayada was they had these dams there. And when it had rained, you had these vast lakes of water that then would overflow over the dam, creating these incredible waterfalls. Now, what's very interesting is Rayada is Old English for waterfall. Now, I find that quite strange because the Rayada dams are named after the town there. So there must have been a waterfall there. And so this idea of the waterfall chimed with me. I thought, oh my God, he's named after a waterfall. And I used to go there to watch this huge outpouring of water from the dam. So I decided to look what Fritha meant. Now, of course, in progressive rock, we have Fred Frith. And that name comes from a place as well. And a frith is an inlet of water. It's where the ocean has come in to the land and created an inlet. Right, so I found this very interesting that you've got this Rayada representing the outpouring of stuff and Fritha representing the water coming in. It's the water coming out of the man. And then you see that Paul Gallico has symbolised this outpouring of the man's experience into this young girl. And so you could see this as an educational metaphor, but an aesthetic metaphor, because he's a painter. He sees the world in a certain way. And he sees the world and puts the stuff out there. So, and in doing that, it isolates him. Okay? I found that very interesting. Now, of course, birds... birds usually symbolize freedom, but they also symbolize the soul, especially the soul leaving the body can be seen as a bird flying away. And without doubt, the snow goose is used for that. When Fritha returns to the lighthouse and she sees that bird, it's almost that is Rayada and he is leaving. And so within this book is encased a great dialectic of almost like breath coming out and coming in, of the sea crashing in and coming into the land, of birds leaving and returning, of eternal cycles of nature. And I believe that it's when a piece of art manages to encapsulate these things, it resonates with people. And that's why this is a serious story rather than just a sentimental story. Now, Paul Gallico based his story on the naturalist Sir Peter Scott, who actually married a lady, somebody Howard, in around about the time he wrote the book. She was younger than him. And so this story was based upon Sir Peter Scott. Now, Sir Peter Scott is interesting because he was actually the son of Scott of the Antarctic. And so you start to see that if you think of someone like Peter Scott, his father went away exploring and he tried to get to the South Pole. You know, he was an explorer and he went, and it's a very famous thing here in the UK of what happened to Scott of the Antarctic is that... He got to the South Pole, but when he got there, somebody, Amundsen, I think, had already got there before him, and they turned back, and because they hadn't quite thought it out, they all ended up dying, and all the bodies were down there. Later on, people managed to find them, and they found this sort of little tent with all these frozen bodies in, and there was a diary that he kept, and this idea of loss, this idea of mourning, this idea of the wrench of loving people, and that is the best thing in life, but the more you love people, the more they will eventually leave. And I think that is quite a powerful theme. So CAMEL, I think on their previous album, I'm pretty sure they'd done a version of a song which sort of explored Lord of the Rings. I don't know what the title of the track was. That they'd enjoyed doing that, so they wanted to make an album and base it on a story, so they decided to go for the Snow Goose. When Paul Gallico found out they were going to do this, he said, well, you're not doing this for copyright. And so this had to change a little bit, and this is why they've had music inspired by. But when you look at it, it is obvious that this is a direct musical encapsulation of the story. So we now return to my idea that it's a little bit boring, which is the thing that put me off it. I think the reason why I found it boring is because I didn't know the story. Once I knew the story and I could sit with this in my hands, going through it, the music fills in the emotional content of that story. So music exists as an art form which is it is very emotional. Music can tell a story. If you think of Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, for example, I've been told by people in Germany that it is exactly like a storm brewing and coming forth in a pastoral setting. It basically lasts the length of an average storm out there. So it tells the story of that. But even then, describing a storm passing is not really a story. So the emotional aspect, which I always describe as the hedonist aspect of art, music does very well. Doesn't do storytelling so well, but what music allows is the human voice to enter. And the human voice is without doubt the best way of telling a story. And so most music that people like is a mixture of the two. It's this music that relates a sort of emotional feeling thing, and then the lyrics that tell some sort of story, and a simple story. When you've got a simple story, it's very easy to go straight to the themes. So you get these two things in isolation. Now, one of the reasons why I think people find progressive rock difficult, normal people, you know, people who aren't fans of progressive rock, is because there's a lot of instrumental music there. And without the voice there, without the person putting in there, it suddenly becomes very abstract and they don't quite know how to approach it. I think people who like progressive rock, what they do is fill in the story. You know, as a young man, you know, when I listened to Gates of Delirium, that was Tolkien-esque to me, but it was Tolkien-esque in that it was telling the story of a battle, and it was chaotic. And you felt that the march towards that battle, and then the battle ensuing, and then the aftermath, all within the music. Now, I don't know what Gates of Delirium is about. I went on the title Gates, and I pictured in Tolkien the big battle outside the gates of whatever the bad place is called, Mordor. Recently, we did a reaction to Awaken by Yes, and Awaken, it describes very similar thing to this. It describes the passage of the soul into the afterlife. And so I think progressive rock fans, different to jazz fusion fans, when you listen to jazz fusion, when you listen to jazz, it is pure music, and you're enjoying the story is what's going on in the person's mind. You are following the track of their thoughts, and you can follow someone's thoughts at incredible speed if you are able to understand the language of it and then focus on it. With progressive rock, it's much more about, it tells a story, and it describes places, it describes people, it describes events. And so I think the reason why this album was difficult for me is because it's a difficult album. It has the sheen of being sort of quite easy listening, quaint, you know, very English, you know, not shouting from the rooftops, just subtly exploring little subtle themes, you know, really embodying nature with the coast, the sea, all this sort of stuff is in there. And I think that is something that is an acquired taste. Now, CAMEL actually had a lot of success at the time, and I think perhaps people who were listening to the early albums, you know, through Moon Madness and all those, to this was their great achievement. This is their Tales from Topographic Oceans. This is their Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And I think, rather than with Yes, the first Yes album I heard was the Yes album. Then I went and got Fragile, and I think I got Yes shows. So by the time I got to Tales from Topographic Oceans, I bought into the band. I understood what they were. With this one, diving straight into this, would have been like me hearing Tales from Topographic Oceans from at the first for the first time, and what could have happened? I could have taken a visceral dislike to Yes that carried on for the rest of time. But so this brings me to what this video is about and why I've done it, because often when I do these videos, I'm not just here to reevaluate CAMEL. I'm here to try and get some truth out. So these videos have a little bit more meaning, a little bit like I've tried to, read into the story of the Snow Goose. And my take is this, that in life, we have to be able to change our opinion. That our opinion changing is fundamentally what learning is about. And in terms of art shows us another way of looking at the world. It exposes another type of beauty. So if we become fixed in what we like, we are unable to open the window up and look out and see the world in a new way and be able to see beauty in a new way. And if we can't see beauty in a new way, we are unable then to build our ethical view of the world, because our ethical view of the world is fundamentally based upon what we see as good and bad. And so we enter the last bit of this video. There is a YouTuber called Joan Fry, and I interviewed her recently. Jo is a really interesting YouTuber. She has played guitar all her life, but she is someone who plays for the love of it. And it's not like me, a professional musician. I've spent a lot of time playing music I didn't necessarily love, but it was how I earned a living. She comes to music because she loves it. I don't think she's had any formal training. I don't think she particularly teaches music like I have. So over my life, I have developed quite a bit of knowledge about the history of music theory, and how to play instruments and all that sort of stuff. So I come to this channel with that. Jo doesn't. Jo brings something else. And I think I was chatting to Jo the other night via Facebook Messenger. And there was one point where she said, the thing about me is I know nothing. But she doesn't not know nothing. That's a double negative, which means she does know something. And what she knows is her life experience. And she brings that to the fore. She is a music fan. She loves music. And her channel is her taking what she loves, but opening it out. So she is there learning. I come to this with a whole mass of prejudices, a whole mass of assumptions, because I've been so deeply involved in it. Oh, this is the best guitarist, this is this and this. And so for me to progress forward, I've almost got to unlearn. And in a way, we all have to unlearn. We all have to take our prejudices and undo them. Now, Jo, coming from a sort of rock background, I can understand that when she starts to go towards the progressive rock and the jazz fusion and all that type of stuff, that is new ground for her. And so we've talked about this quite a lot. But by the same token, I have to be kept in check and not just going down the technical and getting all, obsessed as many music YouTubers do in just looking at the chord progressions and the virtuosity and the brilliance and all that type of stuff. And so the Snow Goose is really about that learning experience. But I want to end with this, because this is really what I think is my message here. Is that when I interviewed Jo, politically, she is quite over on the left. And it's perceived, I think, by some people that I'm over on the right. And so even before we did the interview, we had a little bit of a tussle and we had a discussion about this. We've kept in contact. And when the US election happened, I think it was quite devastating for those on the left to see Trump getting into power. And they are almost now terrified. But on the same token, it's also, I believe, shown that the real thing that's going on at the moment is the people against the establishment. And I think we have become very attuned that there's an established out there with a narrative. Who do you vote for? You know, this is the new tussle. And so I thought when the election happened, I would put a political video out. Now this has really bamboozled me, because I actually put 2 videos out on the same day. Now the reason I did that is because I had my proper music video out that I knew would get some views, and then this political video would do nothing. So, because it's nothing to do, my audience don't come to me from political opinion. Why should I talk about politics? Why should I? What do I know about politics? I'm a musician. Shut your mouth, Andy, you know. But I thought I got something to say. And so I did this video, and it's done incredibly well. And so I'm sat there going, oh, do I talk about politics? I mean, I understand how politics relates to ethics and how ethics relates to art. And putting my political opinions aside, to explore how art can inform politics, that could be very useful. So I'm doing this at the moment. And if you notice this video, that's what this video really is. You know, under the auspices of this, CAMEL Snow Goose, I'm exploring this idea of being open-minded, learning new things, and I am now venturing into the realm of the political. So this video, I felt, from an artistic point of view, from a creative point of view, what artists could do is show how we're all connected and to push this idea of unity. Now, I'm not on about unity in political parties. I'm not saying that, you know, the left should chum up with the right. What I'm saying is that if it really is about the establishment and us, we're all together. And although my take was, I see myself as centre left, but I'm not a fan of identity politics. And the reason I'm not is because I'm a creative person, and I've gone into that in depth. But I would have thought Jo would have bristled a little bit about my video, but she didn't. She sent me a lovely message saying, I think you've done the right thing because you're calling for unity. And she said, I agreed with it. And we started chatting. And suddenly I could see a way of people from different political views to come together. Now, the way they come together is they've almost got to put their prejudices aside. They've got to not see the person as being the politics. They have to see the fact that everybody can change their opinion, that you can change your opinion and I can change my opinion. We can all change our opinion. That is so important, that we're open to that and to approach each other with the love and respect to do that, and not to put the barriers up. Now, as much as I've had this experience recently, I've had another experience where the barriers have been put up, that the assumption's been made, and that causes chaos, and it's a bad idea. And so, going back to the Snow Goose, we are all Rayada, and we are all Fritha, right? We are all in a situation where we can be the waterfall, or we can be the inlet in which the sea gushes into. And we need to be open for that to happen. And if we can do that, there will be some sort of transformation, which you can see embodied in being able to take the dove of peace and release it out into the world. And that is what my message is today. Now, when I was chatting to Jo, I did say to her that I'm a creative person. I'm very sensitive. I can fly off the handle. You know, I can be very logical, but I can also get very emotional. And as the audience grows on this, and it seems to grow because I go a little bit deeper, perhaps than other YouTubers, into music, and I try and get down to the bottom of it. And I've learnt that, and I'm trying to do that more. And that is a responsibility. And because I'm quite an anxious, panicky person, it's quite a terrifying thing. And that is something that I've got to deal with, and I've got to learn how to do. And so we are all learning, aren't we? We're surely all learning. And we all want to be learning, because if we stop learning, if we stop being open to new ideas, if we stop being able to shift and to be not necessarily like Fritha, but like Ray Harder, and to be able to open yourself up to this, to the youth, to new ideas. Something which obviously I lampoon a hell of a lot on this channel. But I think it's nice to take a band like CAMEL, who are such a classic progressive rock band from such a long time ago that so many people who watch this channel love, and be able to see in this, actually, right at the bottom of it, the reason why it touches us is because it's about hope and transformation. And so, my re-evaluation of CAMEL, if you want to know at the end of the video, is they're bloody good, aren't they? You know, and isn't music a wonderful thing? If you liked this video, then you could stick a like on it. Please stick a like on it. It'd be great if it's successful, because this one has got no editing. I'm not even in my studio. I'm just sat in my bedroom against my white wall, my white platonic wall. So these are very easy to make. And I basically got up this morning. These ideas were going around my head. I thought, let's just do it. So I knew I wasn't quite prepared, and I knew I'd struggle my way through. But I think I have been able to put across what the story of the Snow Goose by Paul Gallico and the music that all of that instilled in me. So put a like on it and subscribe, because if this one does well, it means I can do more of these easier to make videos. I don't have to do loads of editing. Totally self-centered, Andy. Right, so if you want to become a Patreon, the link is down below. I tell you every single time, you can become a free member, and we're getting more and more free members, which means I will make more and more content for the free members, maybe. But never as good content as the paid members get. But there is some content there, and it's free, so you can't moan. So do you want to come over and become a patron? Also, you can keep in touch with me and see what's going on and all that type of stuff. Also, the other thing that's keeping me going at the moment is the PayPal tip jar, and I use that money basically to fund, you know, the stuff I need to do this channel, which without those funds I wouldn't be here, or I would be here, but it would look awful like it did 2 years ago. But I hope this looks okay. You can see me light in my glasses. I'm sure someone will moan about that at some point. Anyway, and there's a PayPal tip jar below. We're at the end of the video. Thanks for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will be going to back and re-evaluating some other artists, because it's actually a lot more interesting to take on a band you don't like than what you do. There's more things to discover. So keep your mind open, and I'll see you on the next video.